In December 2006, tragedy struck Indonesia's busy waterways as the MV Senopati Nusantara ferry succumbed to a violent storm in the Java Sea. Hundreds of passengers and crew vanished with the vessel, leaving a trail of wreckage and a desperate search for survivors. This new episode of Maritime Mishaps will delve into the harrowing events of that fateful night, exploring the causes of the disaster, the heroic rescue efforts, and the lingering effects on a nation reliant on its maritime routes. The MV Senopati Nusantara, originally named Naruto Maru, set sail for the first time in 1969. Built in Japan by a company called Taguma Shipbuilding, it was assigned a unique identification number. This ferry, designed to carry both people and vehicles on board, officially classified as a roll-on, roll-off ship, went through several name changes over the years. In 1996 alone, it was called Kuroshima 1 in July, and then Citra Mandala Satria just a month later. Finally, in 2004, it received its last name, Senopati Nusantara. Despite its age, Indonesian authorities insisted the ship was safe. The local transport minister argued that it was actually built much later, in 1990, and had been recently serviced in 2006. He assured everyone it had all the necessary safety equipment. On one particular trip, the ferry carried 542 passengers, along with 57 crew members and nearly 30 drivers and conductors for the buses and trucks it was transporting. This is where the skies would go pitch black. The MV Senopati Nusantara would soon be cast into darkness, both literally and figuratively. The Senopati Nusantara was nearing the home stretch of its 2-day journey across the Java Sea on December 30th, 2006. Obviously, this was no young ship. It had been sailing the waters for nearly 4 decades, as previously mentioned. But it still didn't remove the shock when its journey came to a horrifying end near Mandalika Island, about a 3-hour drive northeast of Jakarta. Disaster struck in the form of a fierce storm. Monstrous waves, reaching nearly 4 stories high, and howling winds pounded the vessel for hours. The captain, realizing the seriousness of the situation, sent out a distress call. The ferry was badly hurt and tilting dangerously. This wasn't the first time Indonesia had faced such fury from the weather that season. Deadly landslides, floods, and at least 6 other ship accidents had already plagued the region. One survivor painted a picture of the chaos that unfolded. Passengers panicked, desperately searching for life jackets as the ferry began to tip over. Everything went black. No lights, nothing. The crew tossed life jackets, but some folks couldn't get one. I was lucky enough to snag one, they recounted. The crew told us to be calm and that nothing was going to happen. But at about 11:15 p.m., the ship began to turn over and then capsized, another survivor said to a local television station. I was flushed out by water and I saw many people struggling to save themselves, he said. Others shared their chilling tales of the final moments and their struggle for survival. Several survivors mentioned how passengers became trapped below deck when giant waves crashed onto the ferry. Another survivor described the desperation of the lifeboats. People swarmed one rubber raft, causing it to rip apart. They ended up clinging to the edge of another one, and yet another survivor, traveling with 2 children, an adult and a baby, was filled with dread about their future. The tragedy wasn't lost on a different survivor who witnessed many elderly passengers unable to reach the lifeboats. Some of the older folks just seemed to know what was coming when the ship started to go down, they said, finding solace in the fact that at least some lives were saved. Maybe the most heartbreaking testimony of a survivor came from a man known simply as Nardi. The following quotes are direct statements made to BBC News in the immediate aftermath of the sinking. When the ship rolled over, I tried to break my cabin window. I broke the window and I was thrown out to the sea. There were a lot of things on top of me: debris, furniture, and luggage. I was underwater for almost 15 minutes. Because I wanted to survive, I struggled and came to the surface. I looked to the right and I saw that barely 1 meter of the ship's body could be seen sticking out of the water. I was afraid the ship was going to explode, and I swam away as hard as I could. After 10 strokes, I looked again and the ship was gone. After the ship sank, all I could hear were the cries and screams of passengers on the surface. Around midnight on December 30th, after enduring the storm's battering for over 10 long hours, the Senopati Nusantara finally succumbed. A survivor described the horrifying scene. The ship lurched violently to one side, sending everything tumbling over as it tilted further and further, eventually disappearing beneath the waves. He himself was dragged down with the vessel, but in a desperate fight for survival, managed to break free from the wreckage and reach the surface. There, he found a lifeboat with about 30 other survivors and clambered aboard. The aforementioned survivor called Nardi had a similar experience. Here's the final section of his testimony. The morning after the ship sank, I came across 3 people on a life raft. It was very small, and they were weak. I think the mother died first. An hour later, the father began to die too. I heard him screaming, "Help, help, someone please help my child." I tried hard to save the child, but the rain started to pour down, and so we were being tossed up and down. There were 3 very big waves. They dragged us down, and when we resurfaced, I saw the child was dead. I took his body and tied him to the raft using my trousers. After 3 hours, the fishing boat came around and rescued us. Since then, I haven't been able to stop thinking about the child. I wanted to save him and bring him out alive, but God had a different plan. These were very common experiences shared by many survivors as the search and rescue efforts got underway as soon as the vessel finished sinking. Local fishermen and rescue workers jumped into action, and Indonesia's Navy launched a massive operation. They sent in a whole fleet of ships and helicopters to scour the area. The first 24 hours were crucial. Luckily, over 177 survivors were found thanks to the quick response. But bad weather made things incredibly difficult later on. Strong winds and rough seas hampered rescue efforts considerably. Indonesia's warm waters offered a glimmer of hope. The warm tropical waters, ranging from 72 to 84 degrees Fahrenheit, offered a chance for those with life jackets or other flotation devices. People with flotation devices could potentially survive for days. Officials decided to keep searching for at least a week. However, the head of search and rescue in Surabaya, Muhammad Hernando, wasn't optimistic about finding many more. The harsh weather and lack of supplies were stacked against the survivors. You see, helicopters had trouble spotting survivors in the churning water, as the bodies blended in with the sea foam when looking down from high above. Making matters worse was the fact that people clinging to life rafts struggled to stay afloat. They couldn't all hold on forever. The search area grew much larger too, but only a few more lucky souls were found, and often by pure chance. One survivor, Karsini, shared her experience. "I felt completely alone out there, but I never gave up. I kept swimming until I found a piece of wood and a rope to hold on to. The moment I saw a small boat, I screamed for help with all my might." Many survivors were found clinging to debris or huddled together on life rafts, water up to their necks. Others managed to swim to shore on nearby islands. Sadly, at least 66 bodies were recovered within the first day. Back in Semarang, where the ferry was supposed to land, hundreds of worried families waited anxiously for any news about their loved ones. They watched as rescue teams did everything they could, dropping supplies and survival gear across the search area, hoping to reach more survivors before it was too late. Days turned into weeks, but the search for survivors continued. On January 3rd, a miracle was underway when a group of 12 survivors, including 11 men and a brave 6-year-old boy, were found clinging to life on an abandoned oil rig a whopping 190 miles away from where the ship sank. Another 6 survivors were found on the nearby island of Java. Sadly, not everyone from their life raft made it. Weakened by hunger and the harsh conditions, some couldn't hold on, and their bodies had to be released into the sea. All the rest of the survivors were rushed to a hospital in Surabaya for treatment. The tragedy unfolded further when survivors reported seeing numerous bodies floating in the ocean. Initially, there was confusion as another plane, Adam Air Flight 574, had also crashed just 2 days later in a separate storm. But it was later confirmed these were also victims of the Senopati Nusantara disaster. On January 5th, another 15 survivors were discovered stranded on Kangean Island. Then, a few days later, a cargo ship spotted a life raft near Bali, over 300 miles away. 15 more survivors were pulled from the water, but one passed away shortly after being rescued. The remaining 14 heroes had battled for 10 long days, surviving on rainwater and the emergency supplies in their life raft. They were eventually brought to a province in southern Indonesia for medical care. Indonesia, a giant archipelago with over 17,000 islands and 220 million people, depends heavily on ferries and boats to move folks and other stuff around. But these crowded journeys can sometimes be dangerous, because there aren't always strict rules about how many people or how much cargo a boat can carry. It's hard to know exactly how many people are on board, which can make accidents exponentially worse. The Senopati Nusantara ferry sank after a terrible storm, not because of any mistakes by the captain or because there were too many people on board, as some first thought. Thankfully, the captain survived and was able to help investigators understand exactly what happened. Sadly, over 60 bodies were found near the coast of central Java, either in the water or washed up on beaches. Some were discovered by fishermen, but officials weren't sure if everyone was truly gone. Some might have been unconscious, but still alive. There were also moments of hope. Miraculously, 14 people clung to life on a raft for 9 days and drifted almost 370 miles before being rescued by a passing ship. As of then, over 240 people had been saved, but hundreds more were and still are missing. The sinking of the MV Senopati Nusantara remains the 7th deadliest maritime accident in the world of the 21st century.